the National Executive of the BJP and also a former member of the Rajya Sabha. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to Times Now. The reason why we're, of course, having this conversation is over your participation in the documentary that the BBC has now put out. It's called The Modi Question. It examines the relationship between Prime Minister Modi, also in his previous avatar as the Chief Minister of Gujarat, with the Muslim community in India. So my first question to you, sir, you would, of course, have seen the final cut that's been put out by the BBC. Do you believe that your views have been fairly represented in the documentary, sir?
Well, let me first explain one thing to you, that when I was told about this documentary, I was told there was going to be a film being made. They were making a documentary on India under Modi, where they would also look, incidentally, where it was also look at his relationship with the 2002 Gujarat riots. Now, as things turn out, this was essentially, the first part was essentially only about the 2002 riots, which certainly was not, I didn't feel that was part of the original idea. Now, it was a very fairly exhaustive interview which they took of me. I think it went on for about an hour, which covered various things about what present, the CAA, Article 370, etc., a lot of them. Maybe some of those will be incorporated in subsequent episodes. Now, what I felt about my interventions on the Gujarat riots was that, they were taken in as a sort of pro forma of another view. It was just a sort of pro forma, and here there are some people who have another view, so a couple of sentences from me were just sort of incorporated in that. Where the main thrust of the argument was that, Modi is guilty, etc., etc. That was their thing. I mean, I get the feeling it was a hatchet job which they were trying.
Okay, because have any of your portions, especially with regards to whatever you were asked about the 2002 riots and what you've actually told them on camera, have any of those portions been edited out, Mr. Dasgupta? Can you give us some clarity on that?
Well, it's very difficult for me in hindsight to go back. And first the interview took place about 2 months ago, or maybe 3 months ago, in Calcutta. They actually came down all the way to Calcutta to actually interview me. And the point about it is that, each answer was substantive. Now, from that, they've taken a small chunk, which is what I guess television people who do documentaries do. So obviously, a small percentage of what I've said is actually being reflected in the final cut. So the answer to that is, yes, some of my views have been incorporated, but perhaps not the manner in which why I came to that conclusion. The rationale may not have been included.
So based on what you've seen so far, do you believe that there has been an attempt at distortion, or would you categorically deny that?
Well, it was basically more in the nature of a particular agenda. They wanted to demonstrate that Mr. Modi has got a clean chit, but this clean chit is not emphatic, and these are clouded in controversy. The judgments are spurious, etc., etc. I think there was a ready-made conclusion, and they tried to establish that. So, as I keep on saying, this was a hatchet job, and they went out and did that.
Okay, so for example, the BBC, in this specific context, when it actually showcases you in the documentary, you make interventions when they specifically talk about a certain European Union report which indicts Modi, and they then, of course, place your bite after that where you're seen contradicting that particular report. Let me just quote you. They say they look upon this in terms of suffering that had happened to the Muslim community, and if you look at it in that way, you're certainly bound to come to the conclusion that it was one-sided. There was nothing done on the part of the administration that was that seriously put a check on this, that it was deliberately pre-planned, motivated assault on Muslims by mobs who were not restrained is, in my mind, an exaggeration. So has that particular statement been taken in toto, where you're seen to be accurately contradicting the report of the European Union that they are citing?
Well, I actually contradicted two things. Firstly, I questioned the basis, the assumption on which the EU report was made. But prior to that, I'd actually even questioned the British High Commission's own internal assessment, where I said they had sent some junior people to Gujarat at that time, very, very junior staffers, and they came up with, predictably tendentious conclusions. That part was not incorporated, I am afraid.
Okay, and subsequently, sir, in the documentary, in some of the latter half, when it comes to the circumstances around the death of Haren Pandya, you're again quoted by the BBC, where you're specifically asked, presumably, about whether or not that kind of a meeting did happen, in which Pandya claimed that he was part of, where Mr. Modi allegedly had given a free run to rioters. That is the accusation which in the courts of law has, of course, been settled and disputed, of course. And you're quoted as saying, I don't know what it is, but a chief minister cannot give a blank check to people to run riot. That's the specific quote on your part that they've run. Again, is that something that's taken in totality to put completely at rest the suspicious circumstances around which that so-called mysterious meeting may or may not have taken place?
Well, I said I wasn't at that meeting, so I can't really say what exactly took place in the meeting. But I said I'd be very, very surprised if a chief minister actually gives an instruction for people that they can run riot. I said, it's just not possible. It doesn't strike me as being very credible. To that extent, they've quoted me, right? Yeah. I haven't got any grounds about that particular quote.
Okay. Mr. Dasgupta, in the past, especially when it comes to the Western so-called media projection of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, also the bias that was pretty much evident in their coverage even while he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, you've actually come out criticizing the motivations of the Western media, some of their inherent biases that obviously shows up in their coverage. So my question to you is, why would you participate in a documentary that is being produced by the BBC? Did you yourself have certain apprehensions about how this might actually be coming out eventually?
Well, let's put it this way. Firstly, it was a documentary by an independent producer for the BBC. Okay? Number two, there was things that it was the 75th year of Indian independence, and there was something which they were doing a contemporary report on that. So I normally I have no particular grounds if people have particular editorial positions. Now, the question which really is that should one not participate in something because you might have I certainly don't buy that logic. I participate in television shows and channels where I know it's going to be hostile, but that's part of the game. That much is there. So I have no inhibitions about participating in that. All I'm saying is that, yes, I'm aware that as far as the Western media is concerned, they operate within a particular ecosystem, and that ecosystem suggests that they cannot do any report on Narendra Modi without necessarily being extremely critical and sometimes unfairly so.
Mr. Dasgupta, there's of course you in the documentary. They do play out an interview that Amit Shah had given to Smita Prakash of ANI after the judgment on Teesta Setalvad and RB Srikumar and Sanjeev Bhatt had come out. The Supreme Court had given a scathing judgment on their motivations with respect to their prosecution against Mr. Modi. Then, of course, there was also Mr. Swadesh Singh, who has been represented in the documentary. Now, the three of you, of course, take a view where there is a narrative that comes out that has been projected in the documentary where Mr. Modi was treated very unfairly with respect to the investigations that panned out. Do you believe that this amounts to perhaps a token participation to balance out a certain pre-arrived narrative that they might want to project in the documentary?
Yes, I think, as I kept on saying, the views, my views, which were very contrary to the basic thrust of their argument, were there more as a token presence to show that, yes, we are trying to balance it out. Of course, I don't believe it was really a balance. I think it was very heavily biased in favor of one side, or one particular type of accusation. But yes, a token presence was given to me.
Final two questions, Mr. Dasgupta. The BBC, of course, has gone in quite some depth in terms of producing a multi-part series regarding the equation that Prime Minister Modi shares with the Muslim community. Do you believe their motivations in approaching this documentary could also have been dictated, perhaps guided by the fact that there were British Muslims who also lost their lives in what happened in Gujarat in 2002? Do you think that could be a possible motivation on their part? Because they dwell quite a bit on that.
I think the case of that Muslim family in Yorkshire, which who unfortunately caught in the middle of this thing and lost some of their members to mob. I think that certainly played a very, very important role in shaping this particular narrative of theirs. And they were looking at primarily their domestic audience. Remember, it was screened on BBC Two. It was primarily a domestic audience, which they were. So yes, it was the British Muslims, which I think were their prime audience, which they were trying to appeal to. And but regardless of whether that was the case or not, I personally believe that in so far as there exists a particular ecosystem within the media, at least in far as the Western media is concerned, which is inevitably drawn towards one type of conclusion as far as Minister Modi is concerned. And this was just another example of that. I think we've come to expect that now.
And at the time when, of course, Kashmir Files, today happens to be the 33rd anniversary of the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus, 19th of January. And Kashmir Files is now re-releasing. Of course, it was not a documentary film, but it did project a certain reality of what happened in Kashmir back in the time. Mr. Dasgupta, do you believe that the silence that we've now seen with respect to the plight of the Kashmiri Hindus, even others intervening and saying that the movie Kashmir Files was a work of propaganda, including certain political parties, that it's been made for a certain political purpose? What do you have to say about the selectivity when there's complete outrage over the fact that a movie like Kashmir Files comes out and practically silence as well as endorsement with regards to the kind of the documentary that the BJP puts out with respect to what happened, with the BBC puts out with respect to what happened in 2002?
Well, I think it's quite evident from all this, what you've said so far, is that when it comes to the question of human rights, the indignation is very, very selective. Here, they only looked at one aspect of the problem, the question of the riot. The complexity of the riots which took place in Gujarat was not covered.
Okay.
What was covered was one aspect of it, just one aspect of it. Fair enough, you should cover that aspect, but do cover it in a wider canvas. In the case of Kashmir, and I think we've seen this repeatedly over and over again, the fact that there was a complete ethnic cleansing of the Hindu community from the Kashmir Valley in 1990 is something which is glossed over, in fact ignored, and a policy of complete denial and silence is greeted. And the reaction which took the reaction to the Kashmir Files, Mr. Agnihotry's film on the Kashmir Files, I think is characteristic of that, is very indicative of that, you know, as far as they are concerned, this is an unpleasant reality which must not be allowed to impair or mar their overall narrative. That's what they feel, and you know, Kashmir Files raises awkward questions for them, so they'd rather not deal with it.
Final question. There were 254 Hindus and 790 Muslims who died in the 2002 Gujarat post-Godhra riots. You had 59 Hindus, of course, being killed in the Sabarmati Express train that arrived in Godhra. Do you believe that the Hindu casualties that took place during the riot have not been given adequate attention, that the documentary is therefore fairly one-sided in its focus when it focuses only on one particular community that did form a bulk of the casualties, but the Hindu side has perhaps not been projected in the manner that it should have been?
It certainly is the case, and more important is the question is under what circumstances did these Hindus die? Of course, there was the Sabarmati Express casualties.
Yes.
But apart from that, a large number of the Hindus were killed in police and army police firing, and one of the reasons was that there were attempts by the Gujarat police and other paramilitary forces to control riots to control the rioters, to control mobs at various points. Now, the narrative which is put forward there is that a free rein was given.
Sure.
That the police looked the other way. Nothing was ever done to check the rioters. That narrative is, to my mind, not entirely true. And there was a certain degree of proactive police involvement, which led to the deaths of large numbers of Hindus who were actually rioters. And that's not been covered. So, because that would give a certainly very different interpretation of the so-called culpability of the administration. And that narrative is missing from the overall picture which the BBC has tried to give.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Swapan Dasgupta. It was very comprehensive. We'll also, of course, wait and see how the subsequent episodes in this particular series actually pan out and whether or not there is a fair representation. But thank you so much for giving us your time, sir, and speaking to us.
Thank you.